everyone, and welcome to Windsor COPE's November monthly meeting. I am Diana Borges, the Windsor COPE community leader. Tonight, our presentation is going to be about communications during emergencies. And our speakers are Geoff Peters from our local CERT Community Emergency Response Team and Jim Boggeri with our Sonoma County Fire District. So we are going to give a presentation. They will speak and then I'll come on and explain a little bit about Windsor COPE to you. And we're going to open it up after that to discussions to hear questions from you, comments. Maybe you have your own personal tips for emergency. So we just want to hear from you. And if you don't want to speak, because this is going to be recorded, you can put your questions and comments in the chat by just taking your cursor down to the bottom of the page, hit the chat button, and then over to the right at the bottom, you can actually just type in what you want. So I now want to welcome Geoff Peters, who is going to talk about emergencies that you as residents can use.
Okay, thanks, Diana. I'm going to try to make it real brief and simple. I'll take you through a little bit about communication during emergencies. The effort is to help you understand what your role might be. Hopefully you'll understand more when we're done. But take a look at this fire from previously. Now, in case the captions went too quickly, here are the same captions, and it gives you a little more time to read them. I think that the message, first of all, is during an emergency, you don't know what's going to work, but a lot of things may not work that you're used to working. The phones may not work. 911 may be so busy that they can't respond. Cell towers may mean that your cell phones don't work. Roads can be closed. And this is not just for wildfires, but it can also be for things like earthquakes. Earthquakes are often accompanied by fire, although not wildfire. And so you have to really be prepared for anything. And then one of my favorite quotes comes from our local fire chief, Marshall Turbeville. Just when you need us the most, we may not be there for you. You need to rely on yourself, your neighbors, and trained volunteers. I'm going to take you through a bunch of communications and information tools. So the first group are basically smartphone tools. And by the way, you don't have to quickly write all this down or do screenshots. Diana can distribute to you a PDF of this entire presentation. So all of this stuff can be made available so you don't have to take any notes or anything like that. The first one is Pulsepoint. Pulsepoint relies on Redcom and St. Helena dispatch to identify incidents based on people calling 911 and also based on responding agencies acknowledging and deploying. So that's how they get who's en route, who's deploying for that particular incident. There's a newer one that just very recently was developed by a group of people that I'm associated with that are involved in CERT and COPE. And it was developed to help Northern Sonoma County citizens specifically with wildfire. Pulsepoint actually started out as a system of communicating when somebody needed CPR or AED assistance, and then grew into other things beyond that. Watch duty is simply limited to wildfire. So you will see some incidents that are reported on Pulsepoint because somebody dialed 911 that are not reported on watch duty, and that's because the responding agency indicated that there was no fire. And so they don't put it on watch duty until they have some confirmation that there is an event or an incident. And the confirmation comes from volunteer observers, ham radio operators, and sometimes directly from fire agencies. Another feature of watch duty is that the public are invited to post photos of the incident if they're in the area, not to go to the area, not to interfere with firefighters, or not to run toward fire, which is something firefighters alone do. But rather, if you're in the neighborhood and you have a vantage point and you can take a photo, they moderate the photos to make sure that not the wrong things are posted, but they do post incident fire photos. GroupMe is another app. It's basically a moderated text chat group, and it's designed to allow the people that are participants to ask questions of each other, mainly COPE and CERT leaders and fire officials. It's not designed for casual chatting, and it's not designed for people to ask questions that have already been asked and answered, because the people that are on there during an incident are, quite frankly, busy. It's surprising sometimes, to me at least, how often you'll see Marshal Tuberville in the middle of a major incident send out some information on GroupMe that is more detailed than the information that you would see released to public agencies and so forth. So it's a useful tool for that, but I try to avoid asking questions on GroupMe because I know how busy the fire officials are during an actual incident. My Shake is an app that basically issues earthquake warnings for earthquakes greater than 4.5 magnitude. It's available in English and Spanish, but don't think that you're going to get a warning a day before an earthquake. The warnings frequently come seconds or minutes before the actual shake. Windy is an app that I find useful because one of the things that predicts the direction of spread in a wildfire, along with terrain and available fuels, is wind. And as you all probably know from the many incidents that we've had in the last 5 years, the really large fires that we've had are frequently wind driven. I'm Embercast is the way in which many of those fires spread. And so knowing wind speed and direction is actually a useful way to gauge what's going on. It's not a substitute for the guys that do that professionally, but it does give the amateurs a chance to get a sense of which way that fire is likely to spread. First aid is a tool. I use that with CERT volunteers. They're all trained. They get 7 hours of Red Cross first aid training. But there's so much material in first aid, and there's so many different things that you can run across, that it's helpful to have a kind of a reminder of what to do. And this is basically an app that allows you to list multiple types of things, like an asthma attack or choking or an apparent heart attack. And it basically tells you what the first aid steps that you should take are until a first responder arrives. So those are the apps. In terms of reporting an incident, your best bet is 911. And should you be in a situation where you need to report an incident, you want to provide, the first thing is your exact address or intersection or other location details. You would be amazed at how much it slows response time when the firefighters do not have a direct knowledge of where that fire is located and they're searching for it. There was a fire recently in Mendocino County where they spent a half an hour trying to locate the fire during the time that the fire was growing. And as you know, in a wind-driven event, the difference between a quarter-acre fire and a 40-acre fire could be a half an hour. So the number one thing is to provide precise information regarding your location or the location of the event. Then usually the operator is going to want you to describe the emergency. It's usually pretty simple. It's a fire, or it's a medical issue, or it's a collapsed building, or whatever it is. If you can provide more information, like the presence or absence of injuries, that would be useful because that tells them what kind of equipment to deploy. And if it's a medical incident, also more information that you can provide allows the dispatcher to go through the scripts on their screen and assist you to assist victims with either CPR, stopping the bleeding, that kind of thing. One of the information pieces that I love to tell the CERT volunteers as we're training them is that according to a FEMA national study, 41% of the deaths that occurred during major emergencies and disasters could have been prevented by two skills: clearing the airway and stopping the bleeding. So just having the ability to do some simple things can save lives. Another thing that you can do if you can't call 911 because you have no cell phone service, you have no landline, there's no power or whatever, is call your neighbor. And that doesn't mean call, because if you don't have a phone, you can't call. It may mean ask your neighbor or yell for your neighbor or send somebody what's called sneaker wear, meaning use your shoes, go over to the neighbor and ask them to help you and tell them there's an emergency. If you have a neighborhood COPE or CERT and they're a volunteer that you know that's been trained to help, ask them for help. Those are other alternatives if 911 is not available. Now let's talk about alerting systems, things that tell you that there's an emergency going on. One of the ones that you're probably familiar with is the Noaa radios. You may or may not know that the newest radios, the newest Noaa alert radios, have a feature called SAME, which is basically a code for they know what county you're in based on you're putting a code into the radio. And the radio can be put in the standby mode where you don't hear it, it's not on in any sense, it's sort of sleeping. But if there is an alert in that particular county or in that code, then the radio wakes up, sends a tone alert, and then starts broadcasting the actual alert. So if you don't have a modern NOAA radio and you want to get one, you can get them as cheap as $30 or $40 that have the same capability to allow you to get those wake up alerts. That means you can leave the radio plugged in and on, and you're not listening to anything. You don't have to listen to the weather report over and over and over again. You're just waiting until there's an actual alert. Soco Alert is a Sonoma County alert system. You can sign up to receive alerts through multiple sources: telephone, SMS, text, email. There's the URL where you can sign up. Alerts can be county-wide, or the alerts can specify a specific evacuation zone. And it's a useful service to have. It's not granular below the level of an evacuation zone. It can't tell you specific streets or anything like that. Nixle is used predominantly by police departments. Some fire jurisdictions use it. Often in my area, in northern Sonoma County, what we find is that the fire department alerts the police department, and then they send the Nixle out. But basically, it's an alert that goes out for anything in that particular jurisdiction, typically a zip code or an area. So you can just text your zip code to 888-777, or you can go online and register, and you can tell them how you want to receive your messages. Wheel alerts is something built into smartphones. If you have a modern smartphone, it comes with the wheel alert in the on position, and unless you turn it off, you're going to get alerts. The issue with wheel alerts is it's not terribly granular. If there's an alert, it's going to probably be county-wide. It's probably not even going to be an evacuation zone. Nixle alerts are often not all that granular either. They're in a zip code or a county area. So it just depends on how granular you really want to get. One Call Now is a non-official alerting system. It's one that a number of the CERT and COPE organizations use because it has email, voice messaging, and SMS all on one message. So it translates the words written into a voice message, or you can record an actual person's voice if you want to. And it also includes the capability of polling. So for example, when you get the message and it says, press 1 if you're safely evacuated or something to that effect, press 2 if you need assistance. Then what happens in those cases is a database is built up, and you can press 1 in response to an email message, you can do it in response to a text message, or you can say the word 1 in response to a verbal message, and the net effect of it is to build a database of people that are saying, I'm safe, or I need assistance, or whatever that is that the question is being answered. Hilo Sirens, if you hear a Hilo siren, that means local law enforcement is trying to tell you to get out of Dodge. It's pretty simple, pretty basic. There are a number of communities that are actually thinking of installing sirens because there are places in the county where it's hard to receive. For example, we have 3 places up here in Cloverdale where you can't even receive Noaa radio. It's just dead. And we have places like on Fitch Mountain where they have no internet service. So the only method that you have of knowing that something's going on is a siren. And so that's something that you have to be prepared for. Neighborhood communications. So how do you communicate neighbor to neighbor, or how do you communicate neighbor or citizen to fire services if things aren't working? Well, don't forget that one of the things you can do is what's called sneakerware. You can always, when there are no phones, no internet, no other communication tools, you can go ask your neighbor or some other volunteer to help you, okay? Telephone sounds like a great tool. If you have what's called a copper wire landline, that's the old, plain old telephone service, POTS, it'll work. It'll work even when the electric is out, and it'll work when the internet is down. Unfortunately, for example, in our area, we have a Del Webb community, and all of the phones in that entire senior citizen enclave are what's called voice over internet protocol, VoIP, which means that if the internet is down, they can't call 911, which literally happened last week. The internet went down, and no one in that community was able to dial 911 or get any outside line at all. Cell phones could work in that situation, but they only work when the cell towers are working. So if the internet's down and the cell towers are not working, you're out of luck in that regard. SMS text, very useful when you have a very weak cell signal. So when you have 1 bar on your cell phone and voice is cutting out and it's not working, very often you can still send an SMS text. And it still requires that there be operating cell towers, because you do have that 1 bar, but when it's not very strong signal, it still can work. Email works great when the internet is up, and it doesn't mean only when there's cell phone service. So cell phones can be down, but internet can still be up, because internet can be provided not only through your cell phone service, but it can also be provided through copper wire, through satellite, or through fiber optic. So internet is not necessarily dependent upon cell phones. Websites, same thing as the email. It's up when the internet's up, it's not when it's not. There are 3 kinds of radios that we'll talk about that are used by civilians. One is called the FRS, or Family Radio Service. These are basically your kids' toy walkie-talkie radios. There's no license required, no training required. They're usually only useful up to about 1 mile in a flat area, and a lot less than that in any kind of hilly and mountainous area. GMRS is an upgrade of FRS. It does require a license, but you don't have to take a test or a class. You can just get the license for $70 for 10 years. It's useful for up to 30 miles line of sight. In mountains and hilly areas, you have to use repeaters because the signal won't go through a mountain or a hill. We are currently developing a repeater network throughout northern and western Sonoma County to expand the coverage using work that our CERT organization is doing with the Department of Transportation and Public Works. And then the third one is ham radio. These are actual people that have been licensed, taken the test, and have more expensive gear. Frequently, they're elevated antennas or antenna towers. And those people may well be able to communicate during an emergency directly to the Sonoma County Emergency Management through the volunteer amateur radio group. And there's one that I didn't put in here because it's not so popular anymore, and that's the walkie-talkie CB radios. Another set of sources of information for you are weather information. Why is that important? Well, wind direction and wind speed is often very useful to know about. And so if you go to Weather Underground or Weather Link, you can actually see people that have bought weather stations and publish the data from those weather stations on the internet. Now, again, it requires that you have the internet capability, but it's a free service. You can then zoom in on the map, find your location, find the nearest stations, and then follow those stations. And they will give you the microclimate weather for your particular area. Alert wildfire cameras give you a visual of the same idea. Again, all you need is internet access, and you can go to Alert Wildfire and you can identify activity in incidents and see smoke and possibly fire. Coming soon, we have non-official alert wildfire cameras that are going up around the county. The first one is going up in northern Sonoma County sometime in the next month. And it's on a 60-foot tower. And we have both a high definition visual camera with 40x zoom and also an infrared camera for nighttime detection. And it's used for early detection of ignitions. And we're erecting additional radio communications, including a GMRS repeater on those towers. So those are all going to be available to the public. We will publish the access to them on the URL, how you can access and see the camera, and also connect to the weather station. Radio scanners, you can buy a radio scanner, handheld, desk model, but if you don't want to buy one and you have a smartphone, you can even use the scanner app that's on the internet that's free. Online Radio Box is one example. And you can then go onto that, download the app, put it on your cell phone, and then look for Northern Sonoma County Dispatch. And what it'll do is it'll identify the channel that's on, and then you can listen to Redcom and St. Helena. Basically, you can listen to their dispatching. Why is that useful? A lot of times information from official sources takes a long time to make its way through the system and be released to the public, whereas you can be listening in real time to the communications between your firefighters and the dispatch. It takes a little getting used to. You have to learn the lingo, but you can listen in and understand more about what's going on. And then finally, the CAL FIRE Twitter feed. I'm not a Twitter user myself. I'm not much into any of the social networking tools, but CAL FIRE has a reputation of putting things on the Twitter feed before they're released to their own PIO or public information officer. So it's an interesting thing that you can often find information on the CAL FIRE Twitter feed faster than any other way. Here is the FCC list of things to do to prepare for communications during an emergency. Most of them work if the emergency is such that you still have cell phones or landlines or some other method of communication. When you have no power, when the cell towers are down and the internet is down, I can tell you right now, what you're left with is sneaker wear, meaning go see a neighbor, satellite phones, which are expensive and most people do not own those, the various radio systems that I described, but you still have to have somebody to talk to. So the best thing you can do is to learn to rely upon yourself and your neighbors until the first responders arrive by learning first aid, learning CPR, AED, and learning to help yourself and your neighbors through programs that are offered in the community like COPE and CERT. Our CERT exists basically for training people in preparedness for disasters and emergencies. We also support first responders during actual incidents, including manning evacuation routes, directing traffic, and assisting in establishing and staffing emergency shelters. We also work with the COPE groups to do public education and awareness preparation, much like what we're doing right now. We have teams that have volunteers with radio skills, including ham operators, medical skills, including RNs and EMTs, search and rescue skills, including folks that have worked in construction much of their life, and animal rescue skills, working with mainly the Halter Project, and evacuation skills. So once you're trained as a CERT volunteer, you can use your experience and our equipment to assist your community. As I told you before, we're already working on our first of 5 towers to support wildfire cameras, fire services repeaters, weather stations, and GRMS radio repeaters. And our first tower goes up basically next month. The concrete's already poured, the steel is already here. We just have to get good weather to erect the tower. We're prepared to work with your local COPE organization to train both COPE and CERT volunteers so that we have more qualified people to assist each other during emergencies. So don't forget to volunteer for your COPE organization in Windsor. If you're interested, contact me and I can help you volunteer for the Northern Sonoma County CERT organization. And I'm open to your questions.
Let's just go on. Jim, why don't you do your presentation and then we'll look at the questions in the chat and open it up verbally after.
Okay.
I'll stop sharing my screen, Jim.
You're good. Good evening, everybody. Tonight, Diana wanted me to talk a little bit about dispatch operations and what we call EOCs, or Emergency Operations Centers. For those of you, and we'll kind of taper this towards the town of Windsor, but it is kind of generic county-wide. We talk about dispatch centers. Our biggest dispatch centers here in the county, first of all, is REDCOM. I'm sure you've all heard of REDCOM. REDCOM's specific role is for fire and emergency dispatch, i.e. ambulances, helicopters, things of that nature. And then on the law enforcement side, the Sheriff's Department runs dispatch for law enforcement, which would be for the Sheriff's Department and Windsor PD. Santa Rosa Police Department, Petaluma Police Department, most of the municipalities have their own dispatch centers for law enforcement, but when it comes to fire and medical, REDCOM is the main dispatch center for that. When we have a large incident, and I'll use the Kincaid fire as an example where it was coming into Windsor. When we have a large incident such as the Kincaid, each town and municipality that is threatened by the event will typically open their own EOC, or Emergency Operations Center. They don't really focus much. They don't do a whole lot of they don't do any emergency dispatching, things of that nature. That will stay within the dispatch centers. And actually, the one I forgot was Cal Fire in St. Helena for one of the big dispatch centers as well that we deal with. And they're responsible for Sonoma, Lake, and Napa counties for dispatch. So the EOC is basically made up of just similar to the fire service, where we talk about our chain of command. There is a hierarchy that's built. Members within the EOC are typically, for the town of Windsor, will be town representatives, usually department heads. They all have some sort of, we call it, they're kind of incident command qualified. They have some background as far as incident command structure and operations, things of that nature. For the town of Windsor, the gentleman by the name of John Lance, who is our retired deputy chief, is the emergency management coordinator. So when we set up an EOC for a large event, it's typically here at our main station on Old Redwood Highway in Hembry. We have a room downstairs where we set up computers, phone lines, printers, you name it, everything you could possibly think of to run an emergency operations center. And then we start filling in, and the things they do, basically they do more logistical support for the operations. So for the town of Windsor specifically, they'll be taking care of everything from feeding and restrooms and showers and sleeping arrangements. They'll be working with Department of Public Works. If we have wires down, they'll be working with PG&E, trees down, Public Works. Anything that really is a non-emergent event during a large-scale incident, we can't bog down our 911 system with that. So typically each municipality will have their own EOC and handle what we will consider to be these nuisance calls. Because let's face it, the calls don't start coming just because we have a big incident. It's really an organized effort. It's something they actually train on several times a year when they get everybody together, set up the EOC and make sure that everything's still operating, everybody's still on the same page. Any changes or any updates that are coming along, it keeps everybody current with what's going on. So as I said, you'll have public safety reps. So typically here we will have in our EOC, our fire chief will be here, the chief of police will be here. So we have fire and law enforcement representation. We will have a finance person, because obviously the bills start adding up and they have to track all the finances that are going on. We'll have a public information officer. Actually, that's one of my responsibilities because the media is going to come out of the woodwork. Once again, people are busy. They need, lack of a better term, a distraction to keep the media away from the working environment, because it's just more of a distraction. So typically the heads, the fire chief, the police chief, the sheriff, they'll prepare any kind of media information that we want to put out to the public, and then the PIO will be the person who delivers that. It's usually what we call a unified command. So it's not the police chief's in charge or the fire chief's in charge. Depending on what agencies we have involved, it'll be a unified command. Each agency will have a lead rep that will come in. They will all work in conjunction together to formulate the plan, take care of the needs locally that need to be done. As I said, we could have multiple EOCs. With the Kincaid fire, everything from the North County and Geyserville, Cloverdale, they all had EOCs open, down in the city of Santa Rosa, because while we were dealing with the Kincaid up in Geyserville, in that area, they were dealing with separate fires. So everybody had their own EOCs going. They are in communication. And on top of that, on the local level, we do stay in communication with the county, because the county itself, Department of Emergency Management, will have their own EOC going, dealing with everything from the unincorporated areas, not necessarily municipalities, but things outside of the towns and the cities within Sonoma County. There's a lot going on. But the number one thing is communication. Just as Geoff was speaking about, communication is everything. We are fortunate in the sense that if the power goes out, we have generators, cell towers. We don't worry too much about it. We have sat phones. We always have means of communication. We have our radios. One of the things that we do have, a benefit that we have in public safety, is there's a program called the GETS program, and it's specifically for first responders. When that happens, when a large scale event happens, everybody's on the cell phone. And what happens is it basically locks up the system. You get prioritized and everybody gets put on a list. And as your turn comes up, then you get to make your phone call. Well, in public safety, we can't be put on the back of the list waiting for everybody to make their phone calls to notify family and friends they're okay or what have you. So with this GETS program, we have a special code that when we type it in, it puts us to the top of the list. That way we can get out pertinent information. We can stay in communication with the other EOCs, with our crews out in the field, find out what their needs are, things of that nature. You know, Geoff had touched on cell phones. One of the things that I had learned years ago with a cell phone and a recommendation, because we do deal with a lot of these large scale incidents every year, be it fires, floods, what have you. If the cell towers aren't down, one of the things that you can do is if you have somebody outside of the state, family, friend, what have you, if you call them from your cell phone, you will actually get out right away. You won't get stuck in that lineup waiting to get out, that it will bypass and allow you to make your calls out. So if you want to get a hold of family and friends and let them know you're safe, if you have a contact outside of the state, it'll go direct to them and you won't get held up. So just something to consider. Hard lines, as Geoff talked about, very important. You know, I think when cell phones came around, we all took our landlines and tossed them in the trash. We just don't use them anymore. But they do have a value simply because if the cell towers go down, that doesn't necessarily mean that the phone lines are down. If the cell phones are stacked up because so many calls are coming in, you can still go to your landline phone. Maybe not something you use all the time and maybe something you keep in the cabinet for just such an emergency, but highly recommend that you hang on to your old landlines. It might throw your kids off. They probably won't know how to dial the darn thing, but that's okay. That's for us to play with anyway. Let's see. What do we got here? As I said, you know, they do all sorts of things in the EOC. So primarily their number one responsibility is logistics, taking care of the crews out there, taking care of people who may stay behind, welfare checks, things of that nature, things that are non-emergent that we don't want to tie up the 911 system with. That's what your EOCs are doing. For continuous updates, that's one of the other things people want to know. Where do I go for updates? Nixle is wonderful. We actually do use the Nixle system. One of the things that we and the Sheriff's Department and Santa Rosa Fires really try to stress when we have some of these smaller incidents, people complain, I never got a Nixle on it. One of the things that we want to stress to people is we will only use Nixle for a significant event. If it's an event that's going to be threatening you, if it's going to require an evacuation, you know, things of that nature, that's what they want to save the Nixle system for. What we found was if they overuse it, people tune it out. So if you didn't get a Nixle, it's for one of many reasons, one being geographical. So when the Nixle system works, it's a geographical system. We can actually go in there and dial in a specific geographical area that we want notified. So if we have a fire here in Windsor, well, we don't need to notify the people in Rohnert Park. We don't need to notify Sebastopol. So we can kind of taper down to the geographical area that we want to be notified. Anybody outside the evacuation area, they don't need to know. We don't want to notify them. We want to get the Nixles out immediately to the people who it's going to affect the most. Geoff covered a lot of the information I was going to talk about in regard to communications, which is great presentation. When it comes to the Emergency Operations Center, there are 5 major functions within that. As I said, we have our chain of command or our hierarchy when we do this. But the 5 different functions, one is command. Command is basically overall responsibility of the incident of the EOC. Planning are the ones that go out and they collect, they evaluate, they get the information, they bring it back. They're the ones that disseminate the information. As a PIO, I work in planning. That's how they develop their incident action plans, is based on all the information they get, be it from the crews out in the field. We use our own scouts, things of that nature. It helps us to formulate a plan. The operations section is in charge of the crews in the field. They are strictly there for operations. They're making sure that the crews are safe, the crews are being taken care of. They're conveying that information back to the EOC. So we have real-time updates as far as what our crews are doing, where they're at. So we have some sort of accountability. Logistics, as I mentioned, is everything. You know, one of the biggest things in these large scale incidents is being able to feed your people, making sure we have restroom facilities, we have showers for them to clean up when they come off shift, and areas of sleep, quiet areas of sleep, so they're getting solid rest. So that's one of the things logistics does, is making sure that the people are being taken care of. And then finance, obviously, incident costs. These incidents, large scale incidents, can add up quickly. Typically, they're covered by state and federal funding. So as long as we have the receipts and everything, you know, our contracts and things like that, once the incident's over, our finance department puts a packet together. They send it to the state, or they'll send it to the feds for reimbursement. It's a long process, obviously, but it definitely recoups the cost, because the town of Windsor, little town of Windsor, would have a very difficult time paying the cost for something like a Kincaid fire coming into town. We just financially, we're talking millions and millions of dollars. Methods of communication, as I mentioned, you know, Geoff touched on landlines and ham radios, old school, if you want to get into CB radios. Satellite phones are actually really good. They're not cheap. They can be expensive, but a satellite phone is really a great option for communications, that you won't get tied up. It gets out quickly. The biggest thing is you need to have what we call an open ceiling. If the smoke is banked in, it's really thick, chances are you won't be able to get out. So you need to get in a clear area, no cloud cover, no smoke cover, and that way you have a constant line of sight with whatever satellites are coming around and picking it up. That's really about all I have. I didn't want to get too detailed and confuse people. If you do have specific questions, I'm more than happy to answer it for you. I didn't want to get too in depth with a lot of what it is we do, but it kind of gives you a basic overview of emergency operations centers within your community and the other communities around us.
Thank you, Jim. So I'm going to share my screen because I want to give you a little background about Windsor COPE. So Windsor COPE is a collaborative effort between the town of Windsor, Sonoma County Fire District, and our police department. Windsor COPE is part of COPE Northern Sonoma County, which Geoff did mention a few times, and that is Supervisor Gore's district. COPE started several years ago in Oakmont with the assistance of the Santa Rosa Fire Department and the American Red Cross. And it's a grassroots effort built on neighbors helping neighbors get ready for emergencies. And it's any kind of an emergency. It's wildfires, earthquakes, flooding, shelter in place, evacuations, and that type of things. There's several aspects of it, but it's helping each other, helping you on your property and your neighborhood to reduce potential risks. And then also dissemination of communication down from, for us, like I said, we're COPE Northern Sonoma County District. So we have an advantage of getting information through the group me that Geoff mentioned from COPE Northern Sonoma County. It comes to me as the Windsor COPE community leader. And then I distribute that out to the Windsor neighborhood leaders. And that is actually how this COPE program is facilitated. It's by having neighborhood leaders out in the community. And each leader is responsible for 10 to 20 residents in their immediate area. You may have heard the term block captain. It's the same type of thing. The leaders with co-leaders, collectively, they help each other be ready. And one of the aspects of it is getting a survey done. Each neighbor does a survey, and you find out what your resources are in your neighborhood. So if for some reason we have a major earthquake, like Geoff mentioned, first responders can't get to us. Roads are blocked because they're cracked. Just traffic can't get through. You're going to have to rely on each other. And where are your resources in your immediate neighborhood? Do you have someone who has the CPR training? Do you have a nurse? Who has a generator? All those type of things. And then on the flip side also is what neighbor may need additional assistance? Is there someone who has mobility issues that may be need help evacuating? They don't have a vehicle, those type of things. So Windsor Cope has an emergency preparedness guidebook, and it's a very comprehensive guidebook. It's actually 85 pages long. Those of you online on this call, and then also that are going to be watching the recording, there is an equivalent one that is on the Cope Northern Sonoma County website that is a little more generic for Sonoma County. But the Windsor Cope one has everything that does, but it also has some Windsor maps, so the evacuation maps, our evacuation zones and phone numbers and that type of thing. So I recommend that you go to our website and download that, and it can help you get prepared also in addition to all the other things. So Windsor Cope has held 3 workshops from July to, we just November had our workshop we gave to our seniors. That is held by a collaborative of Town Fire, Police, and Windsor Cope. But we're also doing these monthly meetings. This one is our 3rd one, and we're skipping December, but our next one is going to be in January, and I'm inviting you to attend that one also. And that is another one that applies to more than just Windsor, so you can invite other people. And that's going to be about earthquake preparedness and response. And I'm going to be the speaker. Besides Windsor Cope, I'm also a registered geologist for the state of California. So I'm going to give a little bit of background about earthquakes, but then also about how to prepare and what do we do. And the main thing is, you see up here, drop, cover, hold on. And that's how you, your first response for an earthquake. So that gives you a quick little highlight of Windsor Cope. But what can you do? I mean, there's a lot that residents can do, and you should practice getting ready. One thing is download the website, download the guidebook from the website, and down there in the blue, you can see our new webpage. It has links to everything that you might need for Windsor Cope. Sign up to be a neighborhood leader. We really need more leaders throughout Windsor, and that is how we're going to get prepared on the residential level. You know, how successful Cope is and how prepared we are on the residential level really depends on how involved our neighborhoods are. Attend our monthly meetings. They're free every 3rd Tuesday of each month at 6 p.m. And down here at the bottom, you can see the links. Those are also on the webpage. We do have a YouTube channel. That's what that last link is. We put all of the recordings for the workshops we've done, these monthly meetings, and some additional things in there. The neighborhood training that we did for the leaders is on there also. So right now I am going to open it up for discussion and for questions. You are welcome to unmute yourself to just have a conversation with us. We are going to start though with questions that were put in the chat. Geoff, did you respond to some of these? So can you?
Yeah, I tried to answer. The cell phone one is a hard one because everyone has an iPhone there.
Your audio cut out, Geoff.
You hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Even if you have an iPhone, you might have an iPhone 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, or 13. So I don't know exactly. I can tell you on my phone right now, you go to notifications, down to the bottom, you'll see government alerts. And then you look at the 3 buttons that are there, and you make sure that they're turned on. It means you can get the other alerts, Amber alerts.
Yeah, you're still cutting out. So that was Geoff was answering the question of how do I confirm that my cell phone is set up for WE alerts? It does. I recommend that you just go search the internet because it does depend on which model that you have of your phone. But if you do a search on the internet, it'll give you step by step. I've done it before. And it does, especially if it's an iPhone or an Android, it's going to be a different process. There is another question here, is what are the responsibilities of a CERT volunteer? Geoff?
I did try to answer that in chat.
Okay. Can you just do a real brief so that, because since we're recording?
I'm just worried about cutting out. But basically, there are a number of different roles. We have people of all different ages and capabilities. We have people that are up to 90 years old. We have people with mobility challenges. So what you do is a function of what you volunteer to do and what first responders tell us their needs are. If it is somebody, for example, that has some mobility issues, they may end up sitting at a desk at an emergency shelter registering guests. If it is somebody that has a construction background and is young and athletic, they may assist with search and rescue. We often get asked to assist with evacuations and directing traffic during evacuation events. It's just a function of what the first responders, we operate under the same thing that Jim was talking about, incident command structure. We operate under the incident command rules. Whatever our first responder commanders tell the CERT team they want them to do, that's what we do.
Okay, Geoff, you know what, you are cutting out a little bit more. Let me just read what it said. It might be easier on the recording. So Geoff put in the chat, CERT volunteers can volunteer as official California disaster assistance worker to do whatever is needed and whatever they volunteer for. Some folks might register incoming guests at an emergency shelter, while others direct evacuation traffic. And still others might assist first responders with search and rescue. Each volunteer chooses what skill they feel comfortable with, e.g. RNs often volunteer to help the first aid and get an assignment within the skill set. If interested in more information about CERT, feel free to contact me at gpetersatshowa-farm.com or 301-675-7741. CERT just finished providing CPR and AED training to 131 Windsor High School juniors and seniors, and then we offer them basic first aid classes as well. We can do the same for any group of 10 or more who wish that training. Let's see if there are any other questions. Is there a recommended first aid and CPR training available? I think would great if we could get our neighbors to take these classes. I agree. I was thinking the same thing. If we could somehow set up for Windsor, at least groups, to take the CPR.
It's not hard, and typically your American Heart Association and Red Cross constantly offers basic first aid and CPR classes. I know a lot of the park and recs will do it too. When they bring out their classes for the spring and the fall, they'll include a CPR or a basic first aid class. So there are quite a few out there, but the American Heart Association, American Red Cross are two that if you go to, they'll have a schedule, a long list of their different CPR and first aid classes.
They were offering online for a while, I saw. Probably because of COVID. Do you know if they're still doing that type of a thing?
I don't know. I don't know that. I know they've shifted now to hands-only CPR for the bystanders, and no more ventilations. Now it's strictly about compressions. They've been doing that for several years now. So for people who are leery about giving mouth-to-mouth and things of that nature, they've gone past that. Now it's strictly compressions for CPR.
Okay. Looking for questions.
On the bottom, the question regarding the GRMS radios. I don't know specifically. I will tell you that Midland is probably one of the top brands for radios out there. I know they do have a GRMS radio, and I think it's around $70. Keep in mind that you do have to pay the licensing fee for a GMRS radio. It's not just your kids' walkie-talkies. They're a little more heavy duty. You get a lot greater range on those. They're all over Amazon. If you type in GRMS radios, every manufacturer in the world out there has them, and they'll range anywhere from $60-$70 up to $400. So depending on what you're looking for, they're there. As far as the frequencies, that I'm not sure. I don't have one. I haven't used one, but there are people out there could easily show you. Even Marshall, I think it's pretty well versed on the GRMS radios, could show you how to set up the frequencies. Every in the county, there are multiple frequencies out there. So depending on who you wanted to listen to, that's easy to come by. It's something that I could even get you if you had the GRMS radio. I could give you the frequencies from the different agencies in the county.
And let me add something. I called in because apparently my computer's not not doing well, so I called in. Hopefully you can hear me better now.
Yeah.
To add something to what Jim said, if you do get a GMRS radio, make sure it's what's called a dual band radio.
Yes.
We use repeaters, and if you buy a single band GMRS radio, you'll be able to listen, but you won't be able to be heard. And so we do ask you to buy a dual band radio, which will allow you to use all these new repeaters that the Department of Transportation and Public Works is putting up along with CERT, to enhance the communication capabilities. And if you want a specific model number, we have a whole radio communications team that does training on GMRS radios and also can tell you which models with what features and what price points they're available.
There's your guy.
Yeah, that's perfect.
I'm not the one. It's one of the ham radio guys that
Right.
specialized in GMRS for us.
And keep in mind with GMRS, you will not be communicating with emergency personnel. We're on a completely different frequency, different bands. You will be able to hear us, but you will not be able to communicate with us.
Yeah, we have a workaround for that as well. As we set up the GMRS net, what we're doing is we're creating, for lack of a better word, a control or base station, and they're ham operators that have direct contact with the EOCs.
Right.
And we're also, I've got access to other communications tools to reach the fire officials. So if the GMRS is working and you have something critical to report, your best bet is to dial 911. That's the best way. But if 911's not working and you're out of luck, you can certainly report through us, and we will pass that urgent information on to both law enforcement and fire.
So if that contact information for the ham, that you said that there was a ham club or a ham guy who could offer advice on and training, that'd be great. I'll take it offline.
Yeah, I have to ask his permission to release all of his information.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know if he wants to get inundated, but I can certainly get you the information, and he may well say yes.
Okay, great.
And I can't remember the name, but there is a Sonoma County Amateur Radio Operators Club. They actually came to our first COPE presentation here in Windsor. Once again, when it comes to communications, a great wealth of information. These people are really well-versed and knowledgeable when it comes to ham radios, GMRS, and communications.
Sounds good.
Susie just put the name of the group
There you
into
go.
the chat.
Perfect. We already have a wealth of information here. It's great.
Yeah, so for the recording, it's SCRA, Sonoma County Radio Amateurs. Anyone else have questions, comments? You can type in. If you don't have your microphone, you can type in your question or comment if you want, like you have. So Well, I think that's it. I hope this was very helpful for you. If you have questions after this, you can email me, cope@townofwindsor.com, and I can forward them to Geoff or Jim if it's appropriate for them to answer.
Absolutely.
So thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for being prepared.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time.
And I hope you all have happy holidays, and we see you back here for the January meeting.
See you in January.
Okay. Take care, everyone.
Good night,
night.
everybody.